Well, hi, I'm Greg Kutsona. I'm co-director of science for the church, and I'm interviewing the Reverend Dr. Jessica Moerman. She's a climate and environmental scientist, pastor, educator, and advocate. She serves as the president and CEO of the Evangelical Environmental Network and is a board member of the National Association of Evangelicals. Jessica received her PhD in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and she's held research positions at Johns Hopkins University, University of Michigan, and the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. Her specialization is paleoclimatology, which I hope we get a chance to talk about. And she's married to Chris, with whom she pastors Grace Capital City Church in Washington, D.C., and they have 2 children. So, Jessica, it's always great to talk with you, and I'm really thankful that we get a chance to do that right now.
Absolutely. It's a great honor to be here. Really excited.
Well, I really want to get into your story. It's just fascinating. Can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about how you came to faith in Jesus Christ?
Yeah. So I grew up going to church. That was a real just foundational value of my family. I grew up in East Tennessee, and so had just a really wonderful faith upbringing in the church that really inspired me. One of the key questions that really, especially as I was journeying in my faith, discovering the depths of it, and this question of calling. Calling was a really important emphasis, or at least it stood out to me in our youth group activities, of this sense of God is doing an amazing work in this world, and He is inviting you to partner with Him in it. And that just captured my heart. I was like, yes, I want to join in on that. And I found myself asking, okay, what is my calling? How am I going to partner with you, Lord, in this incredible ministry of bringing the things of heaven down to earth and restoring all things? What does that look like to partner with you? And so that was a real motivating question of building and deepening my faith.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like your experience, at least initially, maybe from there to this date, has been pretty positive with the church. And even one of the things we've talked about in the past is how I think it was a youth pastor that was involved in actually hearing this call to be a scientist and to study God's creation. Or to quote the way that Rebecca Randall wrote up her profile of you in Christianity Today, she said this: Jessica Moerman felt called to join God in ministry, but wondered, how can I serve God's kingdom by studying geology? So tell us a little bit about that story and how you heard a call to this ministry that you are involved in.
Yeah. I mean, it was a time in my life where I was really pursuing God's voice and direction for my life. Lord, yes, I want to join you in ministry. What does that look like? And so I prayed. This is as a high school senior looking to go into college. Lord, what would you have me do with my life? What does this look like? And as I prayed, I continued to hear back from Him, go study geology.
I love that. That's
That's how
amazing.
I was shocked, as it wasn't the answer I was expecting, of looking at how can I partner with you in ministry, go study geology. That didn't sound off the bat to me. I had no idea how those two things fit. And also at the time, in the community I was growing up in suburban rural Tennessee, I wasn't quite sure if I could be a scientist and a Christian. And so I found myself at this place of a real wrestle. This is what I clearly feel like God is leading me into, but can I do that? And so that I found myself wrestling with that question the summer before going off to college. And as you said, the Lord was so gracious. He brought the right person at the right moment into my path. And so I had a youth leader who was asking that simple question: you're going off to college, what are you going to study? Oh, I don't think he was prepared for my answer, because I just spilled my guts of this is what I've been wrestling through. I don't, God's calling me into geology. I don't think I can do this. And he listened so patiently. And then he said, after I'd finished, he said, Jessica, don't you know I'm a geologist?
Mm,
And I just had no clue that that was also what he did. And I was just so amazed to, one, meet a scientist in my church, but let alone a geologist, the very thing that God was leading me into. And so that he helped me see that when we align ourselves with God and seek his kingdom first, he puts the desires on our hearts and we can trust that. And so that gave me the permission that I felt like I needed to pursue geology in college. So I became a geology major, not knowing how ministry and geology fit, but just knowing I needed to be obedient and I could trust where God was leading. And so God is also so good, because he didn't leave me hanging for very long. It was in one of my freshman geology courses where it all came together.
mm.
And we were learning about how you can use the rock record, or things in God's creation, to figure out what climate was like in the past
And
before we
that's the
had
part
weather
about,
stations.
sorry, I ran over you, but that's the part about paleoclimatology then, right? Is going to the
That's it.
past to see what the climate was like in different eras.
It's exactly right. As simple as that. I was in a paleoclimatology lecture, and that's when I heard God in my science class,
Yeah,
essentially speaking
yeah.
to me. In that moment, I was learning about this fascinating science about paleoclimatology, how there was just clues sprinkled throughout the rock record of
Mm,
how God created and shaped this world before we even knew what was going on. It was so fascinating, but also in that moment, Matthew 22 just plunked down in my heart of love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And
mm,
I had heard about climate change. I had heard how it impacted the most vulnerable first and worst. And this is ministry. By studying climate science, I can help serve others and show love for God.
uh,
And so in that moment, I didn't look back. That set the trajectory for my career of pursuing, becoming a paleoclimatologist, getting my PhD in paleoclimatology, and using climate science as ministry.
wow, wow, that's amazing. And it leads to one of the questions I wanted to ask you. This is for particularly for the students that I teach at California State University, Chico, and who are in my science, technology, and religion class, or also the end of the world class, where we study some of the scenarios with climate change and so on. And I'm interested in why caring for our planet is important to you as an evangelical Christian.
Yeah. First, it's important to me because it's important to God.
Hmm.
That's our first commission as followers of Jesus and being made in God's image, is to take care of everything that he has made. And so it says in Genesis chapter 1:28 of how we are made in the image of God, so that we can take care of everything that he has made, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and even the earth itself.
Mhm.
And then we see in Genesis 2 how we're called to tend and care for the garden. And so, at that very core foundational level, taking good care of this planet, of the natural world, of the handiworks of God, the natural world, and the people within it included, that's what it looks like to be a good disciple and
Mhm.
follower of Christ. It's just as foundational as that. And then you can fast forward into the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus and his disciples, of how when we look at the work that God is doing on this earth, it's a work of restoration.
Mhm.
And it's not just the restoration and of us as people, but for all of creation.
Yeah.
And so, again, when it looks like as a Christian called to partner with God and what he's doing on this earth, if we don't include caring for the planet, we're missing out on something very important that God deeply cares about.
Mm. Well,
And
and the thing that,
also, I care. Oh, yes, go
no,
ahead.
please go ahead. There's another part to this that I was going to ask you about that, but no, please continue. Yeah.
Well, and then it just, I think again, Matthew 22, love God, love your neighbor is so foundational for me as well, because I can't love my neighbor well, and I can't love them as myself if I just turn a blind eye to the environmental harms, to polluted air, polluted water, and unsafe climate. If I'm not paying attention to that and working to address that, I am not loving my
Yeah.
neighbor well, and
Yeah.
certainly not as I would like to be loved myself.
Yeah. Well, and I was getting like into this because I remember hearing a talk you did about that really outlines some of the ways that this is caring for the poor among us. And you were talking about that a little bit earlier, because climate change effects have really have been felt much more by those who are the poorest globally, and even in our own country, right? So would you just say a little bit more about that? I know you've already touched on it, but would just outline that a bit more for us, for me.
Yes, I mean, it really is. It's the poorest and the most vulnerable who are most at risk when it comes to climate impacts, climate disasters. We see this in the news of those least able to cope with extreme heat,
Yeah.
wildfires, hurricanes, floods that are often most exposed. And so, whether that's here in the US, of low income housing being within floodplains, or low income housing, some work that I've done of looking at extreme heat and the urban heat island effect,
Mm.
it is our poorest neighborhoods that are experiencing the most extreme temperatures because we've not invested in those neighborhoods in bringing tree cover and that provides shade that keeps temperatures cool. They're unable to flip on the air conditioner. Like someone like myself, I can take that for granted, but not being able to afford or have air conditioning. You look at the global poor, so many examples. We look at the floods in Pakistan of when you're living by the land
Mhm.
and you lose your livelihoods because of these disasters. And so, this is what we're hearing stories upon stories, especially from colleagues in relief and development agencies and humanitarian services, that is, they are speaking with the people who they are serving at home and abroad, that they're identifying weather and climate as being, especially in the last 10 to 20 years, one of the biggest hardships they are facing.
Mm.
And so, again, in our ministry as Christians to care for everyone, this is so important. And one thing I do want to point out also is it's not just the poor who are most affected, but it's often, especially here in the US, people of color as
Mm.
well. And that intersection of how unfair housing practices based on race have created the situation where more neighborhoods of color are exposed to extreme heat or flood risk. How that legacy of that has created a riskier situation for communities of color. That's something also, as Christians, that picture of heaven of being a place of all nations and all tongues together, this also is something that this restorative justice is something that we've got to address as well.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I just find that really moving, just, on an emotional and in some ways aspirational level like this. It really motivates me to want to care for this planet, because there's that justice aspect and the care for the poor. And we had we've had a personal experience of this in the city I live in Chico, which is right next to Paradise, and Paradise had the
Mm.
campfire in 2018, which killed 80, I think it's 85 people. The number was a little bit different, 84, 85 anyway. And I think it's 10, 12,000 structures. The point being, it was disproportionately felt by people who didn't have as many resources as those that had more. And, these kind of wildfires we're having in California, are related to the climate change that to climate change, and we're seeing it now. In Maui, just happened a few weeks ago, and it does. These effects do, they're troubling for all of us, but the poor and, as you said, people of color particularly experience those even more deleteriously than the general population. The average, as you might say. So there's a justice issue here, which is really important. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. If you want to add anything else, please do. I have another question that's related to that in my mind.
Oh, sure. No, please continue.
So, I'm interested, you in the time that I've known you, which I think is about a year. I believe that we were in a event in Portland about a year ago, and you have been elevated to president and CEO of the Evangelical Environmental Network, which is fabulous, and congratulations, well deserved. And so in that, I wonder if there's anything that you're doing right now. What is some work you're doing right now, either in that role or in other roles that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very exciting season. And again, when I look at coming on board at the Evangelical Environmental Network, it feels like it was exactly what the Lord was pointing me towards in that geology class that I was in, and that conversation with my youth leader. And it really has been just it is my joy to be working with this incredible group and the incredible team that I now have the honor to lead, and just have to give incredible kudos to those who came before me. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary of
Wow. Yeah.
EN, 30 years of EN, and incredible leaders from Reverend Mitch Hedgecox to Jim Ball to Stanley LaQuire and so many others who I feel like have been tilling the soil, blazing the trail. And we're just at a moment, I think, now of just momentum and acceleration of really making one climate, helping our fellow evangelicals rediscover and reclaim that biblical mandate to creation care, and integrating this back into the ministry of the church. And then secondly, an incredible opportunity to make climate, which has been for the last several decades a very polarized issue, making this non-partisan.
Yeah.
Because we all live in this world. We all want clean air, clean water, a safe environment to grow up in. And I'm really excited for the work that we're doing at EN, but also partners like yourself and churches across this country who are getting involved and taking action in their own communities, but also joining us with us. So we do education, that education side, but we also want to always pair that with action. And one thing we do is looking at advocacy of how we can lift our voices as citizens and people of faith to share with our policymakers what we care about and why. And one of my favorite things is just that can seem like a really daunting process, right? To reach out to one of your elected officials, tell them what you care about. And I love making that process as easy as possible. And that's something that that is a big focus for us. And so we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, the most historic pieces of climate legislation get passed. So while I've been at EN, I've written several news releases over the past 3 years of saying this is the most historic piece of climate and clean energy legislation. I wrote that in 2020 with the Energy Act. I wrote that in 2021 with the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then topped that in 2022 last year with the Inflation Reduction Act, of just bringing. And so that's what's really exciting, is seeing real change starting to happen, and that's begin to turn the tide. And we're seeing the fruit of that, of new jobs coming to communities that had lost manufacturing jobs, that are now, because of the clean economy and clean energy opportunities, are having new factories, new plants, new wind and solar being built in their districts and their counties, seeing incredible work of cleaning up orphaned and abandoned oil wells that have just been leaking greenhouse gases and other toxins, clean jobs to clean those up now.
Mm,
And one thing that I'm really excited about that we're working on right now is the big talk in town in Washington, D.C. is the Farm Bill right
mm,
now,
mm.
and really partnering with farmers, big and small, across America, in urban farms to rural farms, of being a part of the solution for climate and
Yeah.
putting in place these really incredible conservation practices that lead to healthier foods, store soil carbon in the soil, locking that away. It's just a really exciting time for solutions right
Wow.
now. I know we've got a lot of problems when it comes to, we're seeing a lot of bad news with
Yeah.
extreme weather. But what I'm excited about is we've just got a whole new suite of solutions that we
Mm,
can press into to blunt that impact of making these climate disasters worse.
yeah. Well, and I'm so thankful for the kind of work you do. Last time we got together, which was in Washington, D.C., it was near the Capitol, and you had just been testifying, I think, or working with a senator or a couple senators on these issues. And I don't know. I just think you're such a great person positioned to do that work, and I'm thankful you do it, for the sake of God's creation ultimately.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's not something that I thought that I'd be getting into. Back in that
Yeah.
conversation with my youth leader, this is not the
Yeah.
path that I thought I would be on. But following God is an adventure, and you just never know where He's going to lead.
Yeah.
And so, in my passion about talking about the importance of addressing climate change, I'll talk to anyone. And so, what I found is one of the some really important folks we need to be talking to about it is our elected officials, and especially hearing from, one, their constituents, but two, people of faith as well, of bringing that, helping them see that this is a matter of faith, is really impactful.
Yeah, yeah, I think that, and that voice is incredibly important in our country, and I think the intersection you have of caring for God's creation, the earth particularly, and then doing that out of the resources of faith. And another location that you're in is as a co-pastor or pastor of the church with your husband, Grace Capital City. And we're at Science for the Church, we're really interested in that context, meaning the congregation for the connection of faith and science. And as you mentioned, we've had in our resources and our newsletters and other places materials for this very topic of creation care and et cetera. So that's all a way of leading up to, is there a message that you'd like to tell the church of how to engage science? And this is a broad question, so you can answer that in any way you would like.
Yeah. For me, science is simply studying God's creation. And so it is a way that we draw closer to God. Of For me as a scientist, it has enhanced my faith instead of being that barrier that often in the public imagination, that conflict between science and faith. I found that it's enhanced my faith because I have just seen, by studying the handiworks of God, it's revealed more of His magnificence and His love as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just in general, if we're not taking the discoveries of science into account, into our faith practices, and into the rhythm and life of our churches, we're missing a way that God is speaking and revealing Himself to us. And so, even
Yeah.
just at a very foundational spiritual formation level, it's so important to not forget about, as they say, the book of nature
Mm.
and discovering God there. Incredible quotes from John Calvin, and I found this in my own life, of God's creation, nature being one of the second best way of connecting with God
Yeah.
outside of Scripture.
Well,
And so,
I listened to your sermon on creation care from last year, and I was deeply moved as a Presbyterian to hear John Calvin quoted. And I think it is a part of Calvin that is often not really appreciated, that he loved nature and found that to be, a theater for God's glory is one of the phrases he used, but also a real means of spiritual growth. It was really great to hear you tap into that side of his theology, and of course, more deeply of the scriptural witness, to how we get to know God.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially of growing up Methodist and being taught in the school of John Wesley, being able to lift up John Calvin is always fun. Wesley has some great quotes on stewardship as well. They're there. But
Yeah.
the legacy out of the Presbyterian Church and Reformed theology is on environmental stewardship and creation care is a real example. I always love to, again, point back to the history that this was something that in our churches that we used to engage in. And again, this isn't something new and radical to our faith. This is foundational. This is reclaiming and rediscovering something that over the past couple decades that's fallen by the wayside, and our spiritual lives will be better for it. Our ministries will be more effective for it.
Yeah.
And so again, as when it comes to climate, the environment, pollution, as we think about the communities, the people, the places, the problems that our churches devote ourselves to ministry to, if we don't take into account the science discoveries that point towards one, that climate is changing and that it's us, and that real people are affected now. Oh, and because it's us, it means we can do something about it.
Right.
We are not fulfilling our mission of fully, we're not as effective in our ministries to those people, those places, and those problems. And so that's one thing at EEN, that as we engage with the church leaders that we serve and the churches that we support, is really sitting down with them and saying, okay, what are your mission areas? What ministries are you pursuing right now? And let's make the connection. How does climate or pollution or another environmental issue, how does that impact your existing ministries? And what's a solution that can address both?
Yeah.
And often it feels like we've got to make climate the number one thing, or stand up a new creation care ministry, which is really important. I've done that at my own church at Grace Capital City. But what I love is starting to make those linkages with those existing ministries. And it just becomes a natural outflow of that work, of a new avenue of service by taking this creation care lens and taking climate and environment into account.
Yeah. Yeah. And like my own church in Chico, Bidwell Presbyterian Church, we have a creation care team that's seeking to figure out those things. How can we become more environmentally friendly? How can we do things that are greener in our environment? How can we help, care for this planet? And so I just think that there's a lot there. And, I think one of the problems that I've faced over the years in trying to do this work is it can seem like meaning the problems that our environment is having, that we've given it, it can seem so overwhelming. And so it's getting some kind of bite-sized opportunities that can really be helpful. And, the thing I think that you also embody, Jessica, is you have a great hopefulness. You've already communicated so well. And I think it's another part of it. It's getting that sense that, God can use us for something good here. And I don't know, has there been any lessons you've learned as working as a pastor or just as a church member more broadly that has helped to make that connection for people in the congregation, that may be resistant or unable to know how to make change happen?
Yeah. Well, one thing that within our church as well as at EEN, for us, creation care is a matter of life. And so sometimes it can feel like, oh my goodness, how do I have a climate conversation with someone who maybe is very conservative. And what we have found is that when we root climate impacts and pollution impacts on human health,
Mm,
of protecting life, I can have conversations with everyone because everyone has a loved one who they care about.
mm,
So often, so many in our church communities, you ask who's got asthma, who has
mhm,
severe allergies,
mhm,
hands go up, and climate pollution are triggers for those things. And so, as what I found is making things as local and as personal, making
mhm,
those connections, because it can feel like climate is, there's still that perception that it's something that impacts that are going to happen um, somewhere else or some long time in the future, not a big deal now. But then when you look at how um, I think about climate solutions as benefit multipliers. Climate
mm,
change itself is a threat multiplier. It makes
mm,
bad things even worse.
mm.
But when
Yeah.
we look at climate solutions on the flip side, that means we can address multiple problems all at once. And so, as we, um, for pastors who just have a deep care for the health and well being of their community, and again, for the most vulnerable children, seniors, communities of color who are more at risk for these impacts. Um, when being able to say, hey, as we switch to getting diesel buses off our streets and putting in clean and zero emission buses like EV buses off onto the streets, we're cleaning up our air, we're reducing asthma attacks and triggers for asthma. Over this astounded me, Greg, of medical research that points towards up to 200,000 Americans dying early each year because of dirty air,
Mm.
of
Wow.
air pollution triggering heart attacks,
Yeah.
strokes, asthma attacks, even Parkinson's and dementia. And then
Mm,
you look across the world, and specifically air pollution from fossil fuels of contributing to 6.5 million deaths.
mm,
That's more than malaria and violence combined in terms of worldwide deaths. And it's just like, oh my gosh, we've got to be rushing
mhm.
towards this problem. This has to be something that the church is engaged in. And so, um, as again, those climate solutions are also pollution solutions and have a real impact on the lives of people that we care about and that we serve at home and abroad now, and helping make that connection in those ways. I found is has really unlocked just sort of that heart and ingenuity to look at creative problem solving and
Yeah.
engaging people in these issues that maybe otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. And I feel like that's an important message, that I want the people who will read about what you have to say and listen to this, that I think they'll be encouraged to hear and challenged also, which is really great. I'm thankful for the work you do, and I'm thankful for the way that God has prepared you and gifted you for that work. With that said, is there anything else you'd like to add to what we talked about, Jessica?
Well, I just want to thank you for your work and your ministry. It is so important. And again, I guess my final message for everyone would be, again, we're inundated with bad news about extreme weather and climate and the real impacts that it's having now. And I just really encourage folks to take an action, big or small. That's the antidote. And that is the way that we make sure that we create that brighter, healthier future and present day right now for ourselves and the next generation to come. One thing that always gives me hope and keeps me grounded in um, it's not too late. Is I love how the Lancet Medical Journal, one of the premier scientific medical reports that are out there, they do a yearly climate countdown report. And this has been their message for the last nearly 10 years is climate change is the greatest threat that we face right now, but it's also the greatest opportunity
Hmm.
for public health and well-being as we look to um, just put in new solutions, new innovations, new ways of living that will address many of those health harms of the past and even historic injustices of the past. And so staying laser focused on pursuing those solutions is what keeps me going and gives me hope. And I hope for everyone listening or reading that that can be something that they can take on, hold on to too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that message, and thank you for the way you communicate it and embody it. It's been really great to talk with you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.